NASCAR is a very competitive environment. Their teams spending millions of dollars to eke out the smallest advantage over their competitors. Oftentimes races are decided by hundredths of a second, and they look for whatever advantage they can get.
All of that technology that pours into putting cars on the track, as the sanctioning body, we've got to officiate all of that. Today, we're using technology to better plan, run, and analyze our events from start to finish, and it's given us insights like we've never had before.
It's such a complicated logistical effort. Just envision the Super Bowl, but 38 weekends a year. Our partnership with Microsoft has been a huge win for NASCAR. It's been completely transformational, and we can just really focus on making great racing that our fans are excited to watch.
Okay, we are on the air. It is a live Office Flash Friday coming to you from Microsoft 365 Twin City User Group Admin Friday.
That is right. It's a mouthful, but we got over 200 people here at the MTC in Minneapolis.
That's right.
Live audience with us here today.
We have low announcements, and then at the request of people, I received some feedback that I went too quickly with my Power BI Active Directory. We only have 30 minutes for the show. I either do more recordings or I go quick. I would like to point out that when we publish the videos, that one may pause and rewind.
Right. You can adjust the playback speed now, too.
Yeah, you can also slow me down if you want to. Just slow it down. Okay, so you are not Todd Kidda. Todd Kidda is on a field trip with his daughter. So there you go, Todd. I hope you're having a good time on a bus to Chicago. Mr. Kidda, not here. No episode next week after 100th show. So Todd and I are going to figure that out. So here we go. Let's. You had one cold open that you wanted to talk about.
Well, by the way, I'm Max Fritz.
Yes, of course. You've been on before, and they had your title down there before. I'm Doug. That's Max.
Yeah.
And you had one you wanted to talk about for conditional access for. I suppose we should say that because of the podcast, right? So otherwise, how are they going to know, right? So the conditional access for Azure AD and MFA reset experience shifted around, right?
Right. So the registration experience for MFA and password reset has gone through a lot of changes in preview over the past 6 months. But
Correct.
This is, and it looks nicer, it works better. It's a combined registration experience. We talked about it before. This is a really cool new thing that's been asked for a long, long time. Is I want to make sure when my users register for MFA or password reset that it's actually them. And a lot of times we need to have a little bit more defined control because we don't want somebody in Russia, or maybe you have people in Russia, but we don't want somebody who's not you enrolling for MFA.
Correct.
So now you can use things like trusted network, sign-in risk if you have Azure AD P2, managed devices, terms of use, things like that as part of your enrollment experience.
Right. So the extension of the initial trust barrier gives you more flexibility, right?
Right.
Because instantiating from trust to trust, if we're going to say MFA is a representation of trust, then how do we establish trust?
We need to be from trust.
The from trust. And you get to decide now more granularly what the rules of that trust extension are.
That's right.
All right?
It's literally conditional access policy specifically for registering for MFA.
Interestingly enough, this one, the announcement of this one, if you are an Azure AD person, you kind of need to follow Alex Simons on Twitter.
Yes.
Because some things land there, and then the leads get buried, they don't get rolled up to the top post, or you can just watch us and we'll distill out stuff for you. I was about to use a different word.
Right.
The appropriate news will be curated for you if you want to tune in to where we are, at least what we think is relevant for enterprises, right, on top of it. So that one was an interesting one. There's a couple other ones that he put out, but I think this is the most tangible impact one for people for this one.
Right, and this one was just yesterday.
Correct.
I mean,
yep, hot off the presses. So there you go. So again, we'd announced the preview stuff for this, the early on, the vision setting for it. Now it's the reality for it.
Yeah.
All right,
and
cool.
One more identity thing. I don't think we covered this last week, or you covered this last week.
I don't know.
Now 256 character passwords in Azure AD.
Okay.
We are not limited to 16 character passwords any longer.
Fair enough. Sure. If you want to do that to your users to enforce 256 character passwords or 128 character passwords, you let me know how that rolls for you, right? Like, I got no problem with that. Someone's like, what about service accounts and the rest of the stuff? You should be using trusted secrets and application registrations and mutual certificate and key vault. You should not be doing it that way. So that's just the purist in me. For the reality speakers in you, if you do wish to have super long, but I would argue as soon as you get beyond a certain point, if you look at the mathematical numbers, you're simply, if it gets breached, they have you. If they don't, they don't. And if you put conditional access rules around all of your accounts, say they can only come in from trusted machines with these trusted certificates on them, you can close the barriers for that. So I'd say MFA all the way. And we've been very public at Microsoft. We only force our user password rotation
once a year.
Once a year. And so, as a matter of fact, it's resulted in a huge uptick of password resets inside of Microsoft. They self-service password reset because no one remembers what their password is anymore.
I don't know. I
We
never type it
literally
in.
don't use it. Like we just don't. And so, okay, here we go. So that's it for the identity announcements for the
Sure.
week that are relevant I think, for where we're at. Again, we only have a couple, and then we're going to dive in nice and slow roll through the Active Directory connections in Power BI, how you can use that to link to their other identity reports, and the ongoing thing we're talking about, building a dashboard with Office telemetry. So we're going to spend almost 15 minutes on that. We're really going to dive in and go slow and explore that Active Directory connector in Power BI so you can use it. Before then, the news, PowerApps. A while back, we introduced Canvas components. Did you pay attention to those for Canvas applications inside of Power BI? Well, an announcement got released on top of it that you can now essentially have those. You can leverage those directly from within Cloud Apps. So for some reason it got shut down, but I'll pull the link back up because I think it's worth gandering at. Here it is. And so what you can do is you can go browse around and import a component. It's no longer from a local file. You can go grab it from another asset and essentially siphon that component in. So they show an example of what they're doing for different component stuff on top of it, like progress bar samples and all sorts of other things on top of it. So if you are a person who likes the component framework, and the reason
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and the reason we would use a component is
Reuse.
Yeah. Because otherwise, if you keep copying and pasting controls across multiple pages and you want to make an update, it doesn't work like a header or footer. That's the whole point. And I did put a breadcrumb in the show notes explaining the original component announcement in preview, and now, of course, then people are like, oh, I can reuse components. Well, yes, from a file system. Well, that's not super handy. How can I make them more cloud version-ish, if you will?
Files aren't exactly how we work anymore.
Correct. It's not something we traditionally do on top of it. Okay, so the component features, pretty cool announcements this week.
Componentize your apps.
On top of that stuff. Teams, if you are a voice Teams experience day, and Richard Branson, one of the MVPs, is doing some stuff and sessions today around this here at the Admin Workshop Day. Auto Attendant Call Queue Service got some updates this week, pretty significant ones too. Shared holiday tables, direct routing numbers can now be assigned to auto attendant queues, right? So if you're a voice person, that's a really big announcement. Hybrid numbers to A and C queues is in public preview. Multiple numbers to an auto attendant or a queue, and round robin routing is now in there. So if you recall, at sort of the end of last calendar year, we shut down the transition roadmap from Skype for Business over to Teams. Now, everything was announcing, everything go forward is going to happen over in Teams, and there are these like list of features that were worked on from the Teams voice group. This just continues to round out that feature set for PBX services and related stuff around lightweight, group call handling within the Teams fabric.
And it's going to keep happening.
Yes. So there you go. There's the big shift over on that side on top of it. Power BI got an uplift for trusted third-party connectors. Did you get a chance to check this one out at all?
I actually didn't see that one.
It's pretty cool. So and it's a short post and has two elements to it. One is for developers. The other half of it is for users. And the reason this is important is because how do you want to, if you're going to embrace a third-party connection into Power BI, how do you establish that's a legit thing? That it's not a malicious code base, right?
You have to review it manually.
Yeah, right. So there wasn't a common signing fabric for doing that stuff, right? Much like a lot of other things, we're bringing the sort of industrial side to it. Now, of course, there was no way to inject them, but there was potentially a way for you to be tricked, right? And so this simply increases the security. So developers have an obligation to use the Make PQX tool and go through a signing process, just like anything else you produce for code signing. You have to go through that now. And for end users and admin, you can read about the links on how to trust a third-party connector and decide which ones that you want to manage. And so within Power BI, we have the third-party connector fabric.
And it's cool you can use group policy or any sort of policy to apply these trusts across the organization.
Yeah, there's all sorts of options for doing some of this stuff. So check it out for the post for that one. Now, there's also some updates to the Power Platform Admin Center for reporting and the rest of the stuff. Go check those out. Those are in the show notes. But we did really want to focus on our cut lesson for Power BI. Now, why so few announcements this week?
We have SharePoint conference.
SharePoint conference.
We have the PowerApps, what is it called? The Business App Summit.
The Business App Summit. And last week was
Build.
So
you should
it's
have
okay.
your fill.
As we like to say around here, it's okay for the geeks to take a week off once in a while and let us just absorb the previous news. So we've done that. Now, what we want to do then today is continue our series. The challenge that we are taking up with this series is how does one get visibility as to where people are storing and managing and consuming files within their entire fabric. And you would store files on local hard drives, SharePoint and OneDrive and the online sources for it. People might be using other cloud services. So what are the sources of the data you can do that for and for identity? And we started our journey by saying you should turn on Office telemetry services.
Right.
And then you're going to make a Power BI dashboard that starts combining this with 365 logs. So we're on this journey of absorbing data. And at this point, we made it through 3 steps: Office telemetry, Active Directory domain services for the identity, and the SQL database for that Office telemetry services creates on the back end. And everybody said, slow down, I didn't get the Active Directory part. I heard that feedback loud and clear. Even though I'd like to point out, can rewind and slow me down anytime you want to.
We're going to do it slower here today.
We're going to do it a little slower. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out, and can you do me a favor and hit the one Office Floorbox 2 button right there, just right below that one? That'd be perfect. And hopefully that should cut scene over. And we're just going to go full screen on this because watching Max and Doug has absolutely no value associated to this. The content is the king, right? You can take a break. You're off stage.
All right, and I've left the room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could if you wanted to. All right, so where I'm at inside of it, all I've done so far is hit the Get Data button, and I selected the Other tab over here. And we're going to pick Active Directory as our choice for what we want to grab. So I'm hitting Active Directory, and I'm saying Connect. Now, here is an assumption that you have a legit user within your Active Directory that can read the directory. That is the only assumption we are making. Now, mine's going to pop in and let me automatically connect because this is a domain joined machine with local credentials.
Right.
If you wanted to, you could provide credentials. Mine will automatically detect mine, and then it should let us in here right away.
And just
So this
to
is
clarify for those who aren't familiar, read access is a pretty standard thing in Active Directory.
Yes, most users can do it. Like your normal business user, you don't even need to be an admin.
Right, unless you've done some really heavy permission customization.
Yeah, which is extremely rare, but if you did, you'll only be able to see within the connector that which you have rights to. Now,
Correct.
what are the attributes we really need for our users?
We need EPN. We need
User
first and
principal
last
name, SAM account name, because domain/username is a format used by logs. And we need first and last name and department, maybe office location, those kind of things. So our goal for today is going to be to explore this connector and really kind of explore the space of this connector.
Yeah.
Right? So if you'll notice when we connect in, it turns Active Directory, and we're going to zoom in here a little bit, it turns Active Directory what looks like an Excel table. All right?
Ooh.
And so every type of object within the directory is illustrated as a table. So these are all the potential objects that you have visibility towards and that it's capable of interpreting within the system.
It's just like looking at the attribute editor in,
Correct.
In an object.
Of particular interest to us is this bottom one here called user. All right? Now, and notice immediately when it come into user over here, it goes and shows you a preview of Active Directory. Now, I'm going to call your attention to a couple of things about this. You got display name, and then everything else coming across is a type record, right? So let's cut back to Max and I for a minute. This is a little bit of history around directories. And so for live audience, for people remote, I want you to just raise your hand or think about it. If you remember the X400 or X500 directory standards, anyone old enough and have enough gray hair for that particular thing? Yes, we are. All right, awesome. So if you recall, those were directory standards, right, of presentation and schema with the goal, this global unified directory. Like all the universities are going to be part of this global directory. We'd all have a single identity that we'd use to assert identity on the planet Earth. And we'd use this identity everywhere. How's that been going for us? Right? So anyway, but that history is still in these directory services. Any LDAP, any LDAP directory worth its salt has that schema representation. And Active Directory preserves that with fidelity. And so the underlying database, the jet engines and stuff, but the core of the old school directory are different, but they present themselves using these constructs. And so when you see org person, person, and top, these are old school directory constructs, right? These are X100 directory constructs. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to zoom back out, and we're going to say we would like to edit it. Now, we could just go ahead and load it right away and start messing with it, but we already know as we scroll across, we don't see any details other than distinguished name over here on the far side. And that distinguished name is not going to be very useful for it because that distinguished name isn't represented by audit logs or the SQL database. Because if you look at O365 audit logs, they've got user principal name, the date, time, the event.
Right. Distinguished names don't make it over the Azure AD Connect bridge.
Correct. And when you get Office telemetry services or IIS logs or anything else, those are mostly domain/username.
Right.
And of course, they always are case sensitive and capitalized properly. And no, they're not. And so this is what we have to clean up inside of Power BI. So we're going to hit the edit button because all we see are these record items. And so let's explore those for a minute. And we're going to blow a few of those out. All right. So we're here in the Power BI query editor. And if you look up top, you'll notice there's these little expansion columns on top of these different constructs. So we're going to go ahead and expand the user column. And notice you're going to get an entire giant list. And yes, this list is searchable of attributes. So look, home drive, home phone number.
Ooh, JPEG photo. Let's put
right?
that in.
JPEG photo, all sorts of stuff if you wanted to go through and on top of it. all the radius components, everything else that you wanted to have on top of it. Now, a lot of these are going to be funky data types. You're going to do manipulations or calculations and the rest of the stuff. And Power BI has DAX, the data expression language, for just such a time as this. So if you don't understand how to use one of these attributes, or even what it's supposed to be, if it doesn't come through in Power BI and you don't know what it is, what's your step to go take a look at it?
I don't know, you tell me.
You've got Active Directory users and computers, or what else? What's our pro tool for Active Directory users and computers?
ADSI edit.
ADSI edit, which is Active Directory users and computers for grown-ups.
Be careful, be careful.
It's Active Directory users and computers for grown-ups. Yes, the seatbelt is off, right? It's not the go-kart, it's the car, right? And it's not a self-driving car, so be careful.
Or as an audience member continually is mouthing, PowerShell is available for you as well.
Of course PowerShell is available for you as well if you're an automation human. But
Or
when you're
hit LDAP, just download an LDAP browser.
Okay, yeah, and if you're gonna do LDAP, please do it over 389. True statement. True statement. Yep. Emily, cut back and forth. True statement on top of it. That a huge majority. Thank you. We're confusing the heck out of her. So thank you, Emily, for keeping up with our ramblings today. A true statement we find when we do network surveys with advanced threat analytics, ATA, the on-prem one, that approximately 90% of customers have clear text LDAP running on their networks. Just so you know, if all of you think it's not you,
it is.
Statistically speaking, that can't be true, right? So it's like if someone says, who's the annoying, friend in your group, and if you think it's not you, it's probably you, right? So the kind of thing. All right, so let's go ahead and say we would like to grab something out of here. Out of this one, we're going to uncheck the all up here, and then we're going to go ahead and grab given name out of this one. All right, so I'll go ahead and say OK. And the reason I'm doing this is to show you now, boom, it shows that. Now over on the side over here, reminder, Power BI, if you made a mistake, you can come back over and say, I want to change that step. Like I didn't quite get the attributes I wanted. So you can come back in and say, nope, car license was super important to me, or whatever else it is.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that it's steps, because you shouldn't go and then refilter again.
No. You change the step. You go back and modify it. Now, it's important to note, if further steps were dependent on one you did earlier, then you have the potential to break things. So the first thing you want to do is kind of get rid of all the data you don't want and include the stuff you do. So let's expand open org person a little bit here on top of it. And you'll notice that on top of org person, we got given name, and then we have a couple other attributes. So if you want to, let's just pop this one open and say you don't know and you don't want to go look somewhere else. You can just go ahead and say, I want to see them all. And it will then expand that out. Now, if you'll notice, it titled them all organizational person dot whatever. Now, if you look, now you can start seeing, well, there's company, there's department, and you can just make note of whatever attributes you want to siphon in that you'd need for your reporting requirements. And so there's the organizational given name, right? Postal address, initials, right? IP phone on top of it, mail, right? Now, in this particular case, right, if you look at the organizational person manager, it's another blowout, right? Because some of these things are multi-valued, so you have to build logic in order to handle those things. So it's an interesting exploration of those particular data elements. Now, let's go ahead and come back. And out of this one, what do we really want? We really just want department out of this one. So I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to hit the wheel, and I'm just going to go ahead and grab department. Unselect department. And for some reason, every time I do this, because I check around, I always forget which one of these has I always document it and I share it with people, but I forget every time which one has user principal name. I know which one has SAM account name, but let's just siphon through them. Person has very little in it, CNSN, telephone number. By the way, okay, everyone asks, what do we see in the bottom item of the list? User password. Do you think it's actually the password?
The MD4 hash.
Okay, so it's not even accessible from a hierarchy standpoint for other people's values. So please, that column will come back as null. It's a schema. It's not the actual, oh, I can read out the passwords over a clear text Power BI report. No, 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 and no. And every time I see people, oh, the password's in there. No, it's a database schema. It doesn't mean you have rights to look at it. Okay, so we'll come in here to top for a brief moment, and you will notice, salud, you will notice that we have different elements on top of top. We're not going to grab anything out of here. What we are going to do is come over onto security principle. Do you think there's anything in there that we might want?
Potentially.
I believe there would be, including the all-important SAM account name, which is what we need for our particular linkage over to the Office telemetry reports, right? Because Office telemetry, I said, has SAM account name. So we're going to go ahead and say we would like to grab SAM account name. Now, if you were going along, could SID and SID history be useful things depending on what you're trying to do? Yes.
Absolutely.
So this is the reason I slowed down and broke this data element down. I want you all to understand there's a lot of rich data that you can build your own custom reports out of. And if all you have is user principal name, then you can't sort of walk the ladder and say, show me activities by department, by office location, by business unit. These are important constructs, and we want you to feel comfortable that you can do that stuff. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and say we just wanna grab SAM account name, right? And we'll have that. And then, of course, because it's Power BI, I'm gonna zoom back out. We can say, hey, we'd like to get rid of stuff like, we don't really need POSIX account. We could probably get rid of that one on top of it. What else do we need? MSDS cloud extensions. Now, this is worth a review. Well, hang on. So let's talk about this one.
If you're using an extension attribute in your AD,
if you're using an extension attribute, these are the attributes that are synchronized to
Azure AD.
Assuming you have left things alone from an Azure AD synchronization standpoint. Okay, so remember, this is a lot of data, okay? Now, we have just enough in order to make magic for us. This is good enough. We don't need all these attributes or anything else. We're gonna go ahead and get rid of mail recipient to remove that. So we're essentially just gonna clean this up. Because if I leave all this other goo around, and I can always go bring it back, right? So I'm gonna remove those on top of it. And we don't want these cloud extensions. Now I have a fairly simple set. I've got first name, department, SAM account name, and DN. Okay? Maybe I should have put UPN in, but we don't have any of the UPN data sources
Maybe
today.
last name.
So you can go do that. Well, okay, so let's say, do I want last name instead of the full name, display name? Totally up to you. Hopefully, you've been encouraged to go explore the data source, and you have that.
Right.
On the previous one and in the posts, I do tell you where UPN in, where last name is, what it's called. Because it's not called last name, in case you're wondering. Anyone care to guess what the trivia name is for it? Surname, yes, right? Those who hung around from the LDAP directory days, answering, because we do an LDAP bind, you got to retrieve these things. So you got to browse them around, search through where you find SN, toss it in. Because one of my customers, like, they were bringing it back, and then they were concatenating it back into display name, and I'm like,
No.
probably not necessary. Okay, so just because I think they were having fun with Power BI, and there's nothing wrong with having fun with Power BI. Okay.
Nothing at all.
So now we have this particular data source, so let's just close and apply. Oh, wait, one more thing we want to do. We're going to use this for usernames. So what I want to do is come around and say, hey, look, I'm okay with null for names and everything else. Normally, if I cared about this to match cloud accounts, if I had user principal name in, I'm not going to do it for these ones, but if you were to drop down on top of it, you can say remove empty, and it'll then automatically filter that column for all nulls. So if you have a key value where you want to basically make sure that the data has data in it to make sure your lookup doesn't have a null, you can do that. Because we're going to bind against SAM account name, and every user object sure as heck better have a SAM account name, right? We will not retrieve that. Now, would every user object potentially have a SAM account name? Are there other things that return as user object that might not have a SAM account name? And the answer is yes. There are other objects that are classified as a quote-unquote user that might return that. So make sure you've gotten rid of nulls if you're going to do a lookup, because lookup tables with nulls in them on a key lookup value are bad.
It's always a best practice. If it's going to be a key, remove nulls.
Remove nulls. Okay, so here we are. So we're back. So now we're on top of it. We're going to just go ahead and say close and apply. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I'm going to close out the auto stuff. There are pending changes. We expect that. That was from when we were playing earlier, so I don't need those. Say, no, you can remove them. So, all right. So we're going to have our component come in. Now, we could clean up these names if we wanted to, right? We can go ahead and anytime you want to on top of it, you can just hit rename, and you can just say, I don't care to call this name, right? What do we want to call distinguished name? DN, right? DN, and then maybe security principal, SAM account name, probably a bad name for that. We're just going to call this, SAM, right? So now we have that. Now, I always like to make sure that my data is returning the way I do, and I like to add in a measure. If you don't know what a measure is essentially a dynamic calculation that you can feed in using an Excel expression, and it becomes a data element in the table. So over here, I have nothing on here that tells me how many users I have, correct?
Right.
But I would
measure count.
But I would like to do that. And so if you come right-click on top of the table itself over here, you'll notice it says, hey, there's a new measure. It's an option right there. Now, it drops you into then this Excel bar right up here on top of it. And first thing you get to do is you get to call it whatever you want. And so I'm just gonna call this the user count. I should probably not do that little together, and we'll say equals, and then we're going to get our Excel formula hat on, and we're just going to say, yeah, I'll just do count rows, right? And it says, hey, what table am I doing on top of? No, I don't want to do that. Let's do distinct. Distinct count. That would be good. And then see, here's our tables. We know SAM account name is unique. If you're going to do count distinct as a way to establish the measure, you need to make sure that column is actually unique, right? So SAM account name and UPN sure as heck better qualify as that. And so then, boom, we're off to the races. Now our data has been inflated. We have a user account, a calculation that shows we have a measure. We're going to do the dramatic action of clicking that box, and Power BI puts a chart on screen that says, congratulations, you have 16 users. All right, so now we have a calculation, we have a measure. Now let's go make it fun, and we're going to go after the office telemetry data we had before, because we have 4 minutes. And that's enough time for this exercise to be completed. We're going to go ahead and come in, and we're going to go ahead and get data from a SQL server. All right, so the SQL server that I am getting it from is, oh boy, let's see. Host names are fun for Doug. You know, I think I actually had a command prompt open earlier with it. So it is, should be, I know. But I told you I was going to show, let's see.
Doug's mind empties about every 2 days.
That's probably fair. So I'm just going to come over here and copy it because that's easier. All right. So yeah, MSP lock EC TMY001. Of course, exactly what we wanted. All right. MSP. Know the name of your SQL server. In Envisioning Center, local environment, telemetry server 001. Because I might have 900 telemetry servers someday in my environment. Do you think the admin people around here are a little more, all right, office telemetry, right? Now, there's an important option down here. We covered this before. Why am I choosing import, not direct query? Anybody remember? All right, so direct query is a live hit against the data source. You can't mix types, okay? So because Active Directory is a synchronized data source, we're pulling that data in, massaging it, turning into sort of an in-memory or at least a cached data repository. We can't blend those two models together between direct query and import. And so, and unfortunately, if you do it, you can't convert it. You have to drop it and come back. So don't do like Doug and pick the wrong thing for this. So we'll go ahead and say, okay. On top of it, it says, hey, do you want to go ahead and use your current credentials? Sure, on this one, because I happen to have credentials. Otherwise, you could go ahead and have it. And hopefully it'll connect in here. Now, I'm not going to wait around over much for that to happen, because I just happen to have one that I had in the oven earlier, right, that already has my database connection on top of it, so I don't have to wait for it to come into. Oh, it did it. No, it didn't. Cancel. I probably have a typo, but that's why I did one that's all ready to go. So this is the one where I connected into the SQL data repository, and all I did was pick 3 views from the database. I picked lookup computers, lookup solutions, lookup users, and I guess a 4th one, which is inventory. Now, if you are a SQL person, I would like to or not, even if you're not, I would like to reintroduce you to the option you have for a local SQL database, which is SQL Express 2014, right? It's the minimum bar for doing it. So I just installed the SQL Express edition on one of the machines, and I'm using that as my database. If we're exploring that database, notice you'll see, if you just connect to the database on the SQL Express server, Office Telemetry is running, expand open views, here are all the views that are available. Why am I not going to the tables?
Telemetry's already got filtered in the views.
Because telemetry's already built views for us, right?
Yeah,
why do that? And do you think the telemetry people might come along and update their backend database schema? Yes, of course they will. Will they preserve the views usually?
Yes.
Yes. And so views mean you don't have to say, I'm sorry, and keep rewriting your report. Okay, this is really important for doing that stuff. So I always like to come in and say, hey, what are the views, and explore them around. If you want to do it either in Power BI or in SQL Server, it is your choice. And so these then are our tables over here that we imported, and I did little to nothing to them. This is the inventory table on top of it, right, which we have on top of it. Then we have the computers table, which just has the handful of machines that are on top of it and all the values that are in, solutions, and users. Now users we're going to explore for a brief moment, because if you look in here, username has, right, the username plus the user domain, okay? What did our user table have if we go back for SAM account name? Those happen to be a match, correct? Because those are the two things. So in order to get our reporting and everything to work so we can use the data together, so we can cross-join. Because when you bring these three in, when you highlight inventory, lookup computers, and views, when you do your get data from SQL on top of it, and you bring those 4 tables in, the views automatically understand the joins. You don't have to do any management of relationships on it. You do have to build a relationship between the users we made from Active Directory, the stuff we brought in, right, from last week, and you have to bind it to this lookup view of users. The bridge has to be established there, and that was the only thing I showed last week that was quote-unquote advanced, and all we did was establish this one. We said we would like you to take the username from lookup users and combine it with the users from AD, and that now allows me to get reports that cross the streams, right?
And that's why we wanted that SAM account name can be unique.
That's
we
correct.
needed to have no nulls because it's going to use that to match. It's
Yep.
key.
So if you look in here, then last week we basically started achieving, give me the file open count, right, by the user's first name. And all it was deciding from the Active Directory connector what fields we want to have as part of our report, exploring that. We need you to do all the lessons we're going to do. You need SAM account name, user principal name, at least department, so you can have some business views of your data, but really explore the Active Directory connector and understand it. Because once you have the fields you need in there, now say you only had a few things in Active Directory and something else lived in like an HR database, or you could get an export of a directory, right? You can continue to bind that together and form like a master user table, even if business data comes from other places. So this is super important. If you have logs and you want to turn it into business information. So for example, we built one customer a report out of their expense reporting system. They had a thing, is it for internal or external? So we combined their travel expenditures for internal versus external with the participation in online meetings. And we built a dashboard to say, what is the cost deflection for internal meetings? And what departments are doing a good job of hosting digital meetings as opposed to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this kind of data is priceless for you to blend things together, because Active Directory and a couple other things have all this geek information, and then over there is business data, and that's what we're trying to build, is a business view. The goal behind this exercise that we're going to end up with in the dashboard is something I've done with a handful of customers, where they actually understand a trajectory of how much data is going into their cloud, what's their on-prem data entitlement in NAS servers and the rest of it, and is the cloud a destination? Are we migrating, or is it just yet another place? I'm not judging either answer, but I'm saying you need to be aware. And so all this stuff, this is the foundational exercise, let you take a look at data and then lens it from an identity and a business perspective. Okay, we are 2 minutes over. We're short on announcements, but hopefully that was a good enough review of the Active Directory connector for you to go explore on top of it. You could also use graph connections and all sorts of other crazy things after different stuff, but let's crawl, walk, run our way through this particular exercise. All right, that's enough for Max. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks for hosting Admin Day here. If you're here, hopefully it's a good day for everybody who's here. Todd, hope he has a good day wherever he is. We'll be back in 2 weeks for show 100.
Awesome.
Which is pretty crazy on top of it. Thank you, thank you. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you 2 weeks on Office Flash Friday.